I spent the last 5 years researching over 100 of the most popular supplements. You might be wondering, why would I do that? Well, I was doing research for my upcoming book, The New Science of Supplements, and I wanted to figure out what's actually true and what's complete nonsense about supplements. Because the problem with supplements is that most of the information online is not based on real science. So in this video, I'm going to break down the supplements that are most effective and most evidence-based, the ones that have the least convincing evidence, and the ones that are in the promising category but not proven yet. All right, so let's go through the supplements. We'll start with the top evidence supplements, basically the supplements that have the most evidence, and particularly evidence from human clinical trials, because that's a higher standard of evidence than relying on animal studies or some observational studies or something like that. So actual human randomized controlled trials. So in this list, I'll go through the list of supplements that have been proven to have a more evidence base from human clinical trials. Number one, creatine, probably the most researched supplement in the world, has probably over 1,000 studies probably by now. And, everyone knows creatine is a muscle building supplement, or it supports physical exercise. But the biggest evidence for creatine comes from increasing power, not necessarily muscle mass or even muscle strength. The biggest benefit of creatine is that it increases muscle power and speed and explosiveness. So you have pretty much like an extra gear when it comes to speed and power, because it helps to recycle or produce like this phosphocreatine that is used for muscle contractions. Then the second biggest evidence from the human studies is reducing muscle damage. So basically helps with better recovery. And yes, if you recover faster, you have bigger muscle power, then yes, it will also translate to bigger strength and slightly increased muscle mass. But creatine alone without resistance training does not build muscle. So you need to have some aspect of this resistance training to still like build muscle when supplementing creatine. And the muscle growth effect of creatine is not that large compared to the increased power and even strength for that matter. Then lastly, the biggest evidence for creatine, I would say, is the counteracting sleep deprivation. So it's gone viral pretty much over the last few years that creatine helps to make up for lost sleep in terms of restoring your cognition to a normal baseline. When you're sleep deprived, over 20 hours of being awake, then your cognition drops, attention, memory, focus drops, and creatine helps to bring it back to baseline. Your brain uses a lot of creatine, so that's why it works the way it does work. We'll cover, what needs more evidence for creatine and what's not proven by other supplements later, but we'll continue with the top supplements for this list. Astaxanthin, I would say the biggest evidence for astaxanthin is the skin UV protection. That is a powerful antioxidant. It's a carotenoid that protects your skin against the UV radiation. UV radiation is the number one cause of skin photoaging. And, over the course of decades, you would see a huge difference if you're chronically exposed to excessive amounts of UV radiation on your skin. Skin wrinkles, hyperpigmentation, sunspots, all those things. And astaxanthin, at least based on these clinical trials, would reduce some of that damage from the UV radiation. Now, this doesn't mean that the sun is bad. Of course, the sun is essential for health and you need healthy amounts of sun exposure, but just increasing your skin's resilience against the sun is a good idea. And astaxanthin is one of the most proven and most powerful supplement to actually do that. In terms of skin anti-aging, then it does, by protecting the skin against UV radiation, it also helps to postpone or reduce some of the wrinkle development from excess UV radiation. It's not it's not as proven as something like retinol or something else like that, obviously, but there is a decent amount of some human clinical trials showing that it does have some skin anti-aging benefits. Lowers inflammation, so arguably lowers the inflammation caused by the excess UV radiation in the skin, but systemically helps to also lower some inflammatory markers. If you have normal or low inflammation levels, then it's not going to make a huge difference, but if you have like higher inflammation, then it does appear to lower inflammation in humans. Eye health, so this is interesting as well because the carotenoids, they appear to accumulate a lot in these organs that have a lot of mitochondria. such as eyes or the brain. And astaxanthin also has been seen to have benefits on eye health. Lipids, so it does lower lipids a little bit. So like cholesterol, haven't seen any evidence for triglycerides, but for LDL cholesterol, at least it does. So, but the effects is very small, very modest. Aged garlic extract is the next supplement, and I think it goes very under the radar, the garlic, because it has some side effects. Like if you take blood pressure medication or blood thinners with garlic, then it can cause contraindications. So you definitely don't want to take garlic with a bunch of different other medications. But for, let's say, a semi-healthy person who's not taking any medications, they just want to improve their lipids a little bit, they want to improve their blood sugar a little bit, maybe support their blood pressure slightly, then the garlic has quite a lot of human clinical trials showing that it works for those effects. So lowering cholesterol and lipids, lowering blood pressure, lowering blood sugar, and supporting liver health. Now, again, the same as it applies to all of these supplements, the effects aren't massive. If you have diabetes, then garlic isn't going to fix it, right? It's not going to put you into a normal blood sugar from a diabetic state. If you have slightly elevated blood sugar, let's say your hemoglobin A1C is 5.5, then garlic can support it a little bit. But it's not going to give you a hemoglobin A1C of 4.5 in of itself. Glycine, so amino acid that's like primarily used for glutathione synthesis as well as collagen synthesis. It has been seen to increase glutathione levels, and because of that, it reduces inflammation and also supports oxidative stress redox balance. So a generally very well-rounded, people don't think of glycine as an antioxidant, but because it increases glutathione, it can be thought of it as such. So it's anti-inflammatory. Now, interestingly, or it is better to boost your glutathione levels with glycine and NAC as the next one in this list, than it is to take glutathione, because like having too much antioxidants in of itself isn't beneficial either for you. So you need to have this healthy redox balance. So small amount of oxidative stress is good for you, but with a precursor, the body produces as much glutathione as it needs to. Whereas if you take a straight up antioxidant, then you can't really regulate it that well. But the glycine increases glutathione, reduces inflammation. It also supports liver health. It reduces blood sugar and glycation, so it helps to lower hemoglobin A1C and improves sleep quality when taken before bed. NAC, N-acetylcysteine, so let's move down. And it increases glutathione, reduces inflammation. Now, NAC as a more like a medical utilization in a sense, it has specific effects on especially lung conditions that you don't see from other supplements. So NAC is kind of unique in that sense that it technically could be categorized as like a medicine, like an over-the-counter medicine, like aspirin almost, but it's not. So it's still like a over-the-counter supplement. And the standard utilization of NAC is acetaminophen overdose. So it helps to support the liver. Mucolitis in COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, so lung condition, and chronic bronchitis. So if you're someone who has lung conditions, then NAC has been seen to support those symptoms. Even improving fertility and insulin sensitivity in PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome in women. It reduces OCD symptoms, improves liver function, and improves respiratory symptoms. Omega-3s. So next to creatine, one of the most researched supplements out there, and for some reason wrongly vilified on social media, in my opinion, omega-3s are very, they have a very broad effect. They target multiple organ systems, including the brain, heart, skin, and your endothelial function. So I think omega-3s are definitely one of the most important nutrients for health. Of course, you don't have to get them from an omega-3 supplement. You could eat fish, but most people aren't eating fish enough, and a daily omega-3 supplement can be worthwhile. But omega-3s help to lower triglycerides first and foremost. So high triglycerides are one of the primary drivers of insulin resistance. So the first step before insulin resistance, before hyperglycemia, the first step before that is high triglycerides. The high triglycerides suppress insulin production. They lower glucose utilization in a sense, because triglycerides, they're three fatty acids with a glycerol backbone, so they're basically like fat as fuel. They're used as a fat fuel source, so they suppress insulin production, which then keeps your blood sugar also elevated. So insulin sensitivity means that you have low triglycerides, and high triglycerides will result in worse insulin resistance. Omega-3s also raise blood omega-3 status. So high omega-3 status is associated with reduced heart disease, reduced Alzheimer's, reduced mortality. So I think it's one of those biomarkers that is worthwhile to optimize. If you have low omega-3 status, then it means that your inflammation status will be higher. Your blood vessels will be also more susceptible to inflammation and oxidative stress. So higher omega-3 status just means that your blood is also less viscous, kind of a little bit more thin rather than thick, which is going to be bad for clotting. And it just is I think a big priority to optimize the blood omega-3 status. Lowers inflammation. So contrary to popular belief, omega-3s lower inflammation. It's been shown by a ton of randomized human clinical trials. They don't raise inflammation even if they are like a suboptimal category. Of course, you want to take an omega-3 supplement that is high quality, but even your regular, supermarket fish oil doesn't raise inflammation, as many people would like to think. Supports mental health in human clinical trials and lowers depressive symptoms, mostly through lowering neuroinflammation. So they're particularly important for the brain, the omega-3s. Taurine, another amino acid that is quite popular, and taurine is one of those supplements that has quite a lot of human clinical trials, as I've noticed. So it lowers blood pressure, lowers blood sugar, lowers lipids, lower inflammation. So it targets metabolic syndrome, which is characterized by high waist circumference, low HDL cholesterol, high blood sugar, high blood pressure, and high triglycerides. So taurine helps to target the metabolic syndrome complex. And taurine also improves exercise performance. So it supports aerobic exercise, strength not so much, but mostly aerobic exercise. Ashwagandha, so another supplement that people like to dunk on social media. They, say that it causes anhedonia, like emotionless, numbness, etc. Now, it might happen for some people, but regardless of that fact, or regardless of that opinion, ashwagandha does consistently reduce stress and anxiety in randomized controlled trials. It increases sex hormones, mostly by lowering cortisol and stress. It improves sleep, mostly by lowering cortisol and stress. And it even has been seen to increase VO2 max in human studies. Melatonin, so another one of my favorites. People think of it as sleep hormone, and as a supplement, it has been seen to improve sleep duration and sleep quality, but it's a powerful antioxidant as well. And in larger doses than what's used for sleep, it also lowers inflammation. So the doses for this anti-inflammatory effects are something like 10 milligrams, which is a very large dose, but that's what they've used in the clinical trials. And interestingly, it also lowers lipids and blood sugar. Lutein and zeaxanthin. So these are another carotenoids next to astaxanthin that the main reason people take these carotenoids is for eye health. And there is human clinical evidence that they improve eye health, reduce eye fatigue and digital eye strain, but they also improve inflammation and lower oxidized LDL. For skin, so all these carotenoids have benefits for the skin, improves skin anti-aging similar to astaxanthin, that they help to protect the skin against UV radiation. And all of these carotenoids, as I said, they accumulate in the eyes and the brain, so they also improve cognition and attention. There's supplemental lutein and zeaxanthin in elderly people, at least. Turmeric. So turmeric lowers inflammation, and the biggest evidence for turmeric is the anti-inflammatory effects, and subsequent therapeutic effects is joint pain. So arthritis, there are clinical trials showing that it helps with arthritis. But turmeric also improves metabolic syndrome, so it targets lipids, blood sugar, and inflammation. Berberine, so called nature's metformin, but berberine is not actually that good in lowering blood sugar. Yes, it does so, but it's not like the number one biggest effect of berberine. The biggest effect of berberine is actually lowering cholesterol. So berberine isn't as good. It's worse in lowering blood sugar than metformin, but berberine is better in lowering cholesterol than metformin. It's not as effective at lowering cholesterol as a statin, but it's better at it than metformin. Then berberine also lowers blood pressure, lowers inflammation, and targets visceral fat. So berberine has like antibacterial effects, or like helps with gut dysbiosis to a certain extent. So you need to be kind of careful with that. If you don't have like gut problems, or if you might necessarily don't want to like change your microbiome, then you could be kind of careful with berberine. Vitamin D. So a very popular supplement. It does raise vitamin D. Obviously, you don't get all the benefits of the sunlight from vitamin D, but arguably it's better to have artificially elevated vitamin D than to be vitamin D deficient, especially in places like, Nordic countries. And most people aren't getting enough sunlight. So, I mean, it's better to take the vitamin D than to be deficient. Vitamin D supplements do prevent rickets and help with osteoporosis to a certain extent by promoting bone mineralization. Vitamin D supplements also raise testosterone, but only if you're low in vitamin D. So, there's many reasons why you might be low in testosterone. It could be zinc deficiency, it could be vitamin D deficiency, it could be calorie deficit, whatever the case is. If the cause is low vitamin D, then supplementing vitamin D helps to raise testosterone. And the vitamin D supplements also improve immunity, although sunlight has additional immune benefits. So helps to clear out pathogens. HMB, so it's a byproduct of leucine, and it's, some people think that it's kind of like a troll supplement in the sense that it doesn't have any evidence, kind of a junk supplement, but it does have evidence for muscle preservation in older adults. So people who are in either frailty state or who are in a more catabolic state, people who like exercise a ton, maybe like ultra endurance athletes, or if you exercise a lot in a fasted state, you could benefit from HMB through muscle preservation. So it reduces muscle catabolism basically, but it's not going to make you build more muscle as a person who would be eating enough protein, who would be eating regularly, and who doesn't exercise in a fast state, for example. So it does increase muscle preservation, muscle strength, and muscle mass, mostly in older adults. Essential amino acids and branch chain amino acids, people use it for muscle growth, but the only thing that they actually do for regular people would be reducing muscle soreness. B vitamins, so B1 and others, they help to lower homocysteine. Oftentimes, homocysteine can be high because of methylation issues, and B vitamins will support that. They also lower lipids and improve glycemic control, but mostly if you're actually deficient in B vitamins. If you're adequate in B vitamins, then adding extra B vitamins beyond the recommended daily allowance is not going to do anything. Caffeine. So, coffee is not a supplement, but it contains caffeine. You can also supplement caffeine. Caffeine as a molecule is very well researched, and it also has very proven benefits, mostly for increasing exercise performance, reducing fatigue, and increasing alertness. So, no surprise, if you take pre-workout, you'll, yes, it might make you feel agitated if you're not used to the caffeine, or anxious, or just, too hyped up. But, if you use it correctly, then it does increase exercise performance. And if you use it at the right time. And the same reason it is why it enhances cognitive function as well, attention and memory mostly. Now, of course, if you take too much caffeine, or if you're sensitive to caffeine, you might see a decrease in performance because of being too stimulated. And it might improve mood as well for that reason. Chromium, so a mineral, helps with blood sugar and lipids mostly. Collagen, skin anti-aging. Here, the evidence suggests collagen peptides specifically, not like regular collagen powder. There's slightly different structure, collagen peptides being more bioavailable and bypassing some digestion to a certain extent, and having more bioavailable effects. And there is a controversy about collagen peptides that they don't improve skin anti-aging like wrinkles and elasticity, or that they're only effective in industry-funded studies. But I made a video about it last year. You could like cherry pick it that way, but at the same time, then you would also have to ignore the effect, the actual studies where they show an effect. So it's fair to say that collagen does still have evidence for the elasticity, at least in skin hydration, but it has to be the type of like the collagen peptide formulation. Joint pain and function as well. There's evidence for that. Lowers blood sugar and glycation, mostly because of glycine, lowers blood pressure, lowers lipids. So the glycine component is the big driver there. Magnesium lowers blood pressure, lowers inflammation, supports sleep, and reduces stress. So it can be a good supplement to take if you are deficient in magnesium. If you're not deficient in magnesium, then the evidence doesn't really support that it would help with sleep. It's only very beneficial for sleep if you are deficient in magnesium. And stress is something that depletes magnesium, so it kind of works through both ways. Glucosamine, another, people think that it's a kind of a scam supplement, but it does actually improve joint pain. So there is evidence for that. Lithium, so a supplement that is used for bipolar disorder, actually medically, and thought to have mental health benefits. So it does help with mood stabilization, might improve mood, and improves bipolar disorder. Multivitamin, so the biggest evidence for multivitamin is that it improves cognition in elderly people and enhances episodic memory in elderly people. Now, the age category of older individuals is important because in the elderly people, they tend to undereat food and they have a pretty bad diet. They eat, very like a narrow select of foods, and the foods they eat tend to be worse in quality, like more processed foods and such. So they are more likely to be deficient in certain vitamins and minerals. So it's not that multivitamin is necessary. It's the same with like vitamin D. If you are getting enough of vitamins and minerals from your diet, then it's not going to do anything. But you could use it as an insurance policy that, I take a multivitamin every day just so I can, make sure I get all these different vitamins and minerals. But, it's mostly effective for older individuals who have a worse diet. Nattokinase, so popular supplement on social media recently, but the biggest evidence for that is reduced blood viscosity. So it helps with blood clotting. Nitric oxide boosters like citrulline, they do lower blood pressure. In exercise, they increase time to fatigue. They improve endothelial function, so blood flow and circulation, and might improve also erectile quality because of that reason. Nicotine, so people have become quite addicted to nicotine over the last 2 years. I see on social media all the time that nicotine pouches, nicotine gums, whatever the snooze. Nicotine does improve cognition in low baseline cognition. So if you're understimulated or, let's say with bad sleep, some sort of, mental fatigue, then nicotine will certainly improve the alertness and attention. But nicotine also reduces sleep quality, and it's a vasoconstrictive agent, so it means that reduces blood flow. So if you take nicotine before a gym, for example, then it's counterproductive because it would reduce the blood flow, and then you would maybe need to supplement it with a nitric oxide booster. Ginger, another herb that has anti-inflammatory effects, but surprisingly, one of the biggest effects in human trials is reducing nausea, as well as reducing menstrual pain. But it does also lower inflammation, lower lipids and body weight in people who are either overweight or with high inflammation. Rhodiola rosea, so this is an adaptogenic herb again, and in terms of physical performance, it does increase strength and power and decreases physical fatigue. We'll get to what they don't do as well later, but I'm just going through what they actually do, these supplements. NAD boosters like NMN, NRN, and niacinamide, they all increase NAD levels. Niacinamide can protect the skin against UV radiation. NR, the biggest effect of NR is lowered inflammation, and for NMN, I would say the best supporting evidence is that the endurance. But mostly does it in elderly people, again, who have low NAD levels or poor endurance to begin with. As an athlete, you're probably not going to notice a lot from NMN for endurance. Resveratrol, so thought to be an anti-aging supplement. It doesn't have any real evidence that it would extend lifespan, even in animals, but it does lower cholesterol, it does lower blood pressure, it does reduce inflammation and blood sugar in human clinical trials. But these people are primarily diabetic individuals or overweight individuals. Resveratrol also hinders exercise adaptations, so you need to be careful with that. You definitely don't want to take it like after exercise or around exercise. Pycnogenol, so this is this kind of a tree bark, and improves chronic venous insufficiency, improves lipids, improves vascular disorders, lowers inflammation, and lowers blood sugar. So kind of interesting find. Probiotics. So there's a bunch of different probiotics out there that you could take. The most evidence-based or the most beneficial probiotic strains are Lactobacillus rhamnosus GG, Saccharomyces boulardii, and Bifidobacterium longum. These are the ones that have the most evidence from human studies. And probiotics, they're not miracle supplements. Some people who have dysbiosis or some gut problems might benefit more from probiotics, but the most researched effect, most consistent effect of probiotics is preventing diarrhea or treating diarrhea. Irritable bowel syndrome as well has some evidence, H. pylori infection, and just general gut bacterial infections. So, but that is very context dependent and case specific. Prebiotics, so inulin, beta-glucans, psyllium husk, pectin, and resistant starch. So prebiotics actually have a bit more evidence for the general population than probiotics. So they lower cholesterol, help with constipation, lower blood sugar, reduce inflammation, reduce homocysteine, and support weight loss. Inositol. So inositol is interesting. It is also kind of sweet tasting like glycine, and you get it from like grapefruit in the largest quantities. Inositol lowers blood sugar and lowers cholesterol the most, but the effects aren't massive. There's even actually some studies, human studies, with grapefruit juice being very effective for lowering blood sugar in diabetes. Zinc raises testosterone only if your zinc status or your testosterone levels are low. Fixing zinc status is can be a hidden link in someone's low testosterone. Cold, like flu, reduces the duration and severity of that, lowers blood sugar, and lowers lipids if the zinc status is low. Vitamin C, so lowers inflammation, supports collagen synthesis, is able to treat and prevent scurvy. So, this basically scurvy, the bleeding gums disease, Sailor's disease. It's basically collagen insufficiency in the gums, so which results in bleeding. So vitamin C is an important component of collagen synthesis, and it's worthwhile to get enough dietary vitamin C. More than it's very safe to just consume a lot of dietary vitamin C, but you don't necessarily need to supplement it if you consume a lot of dietary vitamin C. Reduces the duration and severity of common colds, particularly in people under physical stress. So if you are sleep deprived, you do some sort of shift work, you have like an oil rig job, or something that is very physically demanding, security guard or some construction work, then you're more susceptible to colds. Then vitamin C in these cases can be a great way to additionally support your immune system. Wound healing and glycemic control is also shown in humans. Theanine, so amino acid found in tea, improves sleep onset and reduces stress and anxiety. So theanine is often used as a nootropic, but there is not a lot of like nootropic effects of theanine in of itself. It doesn't have any like regular nootropic effects. It's best if you compare or combine it with caffeine, but it doesn't have that much nootropic effects alone. Vitamin E lowers inflammation in inflammatory conditions and helps specifically with lipid peroxidation or the oxidation of cholesterol and other lipids. So can be for sure useful. Vitamin K, but vitamin E is also very easily found in a lot of foods. Vitamin K, last one here, reduces the risk of fractures. So vitamin K1 and K2 both have been shown to do that. slows coronary artery calcification. Both have been shown to do that in clinical trials and increase bone mineral density. All right, let's move on with the supplements or the categories that have the worst evidence for these kind of supplements. First, BCAAs and essential amino acids. There's no evidence that they actually support muscle growth. Only if you're like deficient in these amino acids. If you have like a plant-based diet or a very low calorie diet, only then you could reasonably expect some muscle growth effects from that. But sipping on your EAAs, especially BCAAs, in between your meals is not going to make you build more muscle. Resveratrol and pterostilbene, so both of them are in the longevity category, but there's no evidence that they actually would extend lifespan, especially pterostilbene. There's maybe some for resveratrol, but pterostilbene not so much. And the skin anti-aging as well, they don't have evidence for that. AKG, alpha ketoglutarate, no evidence that it extends lifespan. The evidence for animal studies is also kind of iffy. And the human studies are done that it lowers biological age scores, these DNA methylation scores, but that's not proof that it's going to extend lifespan. It doesn't also improve aerobic performance. It might, there's some evidence that AKG might increase bench press performance. So if you take 3 grams of AKG before a workout, then it might increase your bench press performance. There's some studies on that. And there is some studies that it might help with wound healing, but it's kind of small amount of studies. I think we might talk about it later. Beta carotene, so a carotenoid, which I would consider as one of the least effective carotenoids. It might improve your skin pigmentation, that it makes your skin more orange, but it doesn't have the same evidence as lutein and zeaxanthin or astaxanthin for things like skin photoaging or eye health. And beta carotene in some studies has been seen to be associated with increased mortality in some randomized control trials, but the evidence is very weak and the effect is also very weak. So it's hard to, distinguish the signal from the noise. It might also not improve immune or inflammation markers. So I would consider beta carotene not like a really reliable supplement. HMB, it's not going to increase muscle and strength in young adults, especially if you're eating enough protein and eating frequently. It might only increase the muscle and strength if you're under-eating protein, you're under-eating calories, or you train fasted, you take the HMB while in a fasted state, for example. But if you eat 3 meals a day with enough protein, then it's not going to do it. And it's not going to lower lipids either. There are some studies looking at it, but it doesn't do it. Glutathione, skin anti-aging, really has no effects on that. Carnitine, so oral carnitine, is not going to increase muscle mass, it's not going to improve aerobic performance. Studies are showing that. Nicotine is not going to improve cognition in normal cognitive states. So it only does so in low cognition, so sleep deprivation or some other situation like that. Tribulus terrestris, so it's the most famous old school testosterone booster, but it's not going to increase testosterone. There's a large meta-analysis of a lot of different testosterone boosters, and it doesn't raise testosterone. Urolithin A, so another new longevity supplement that's been hyped up recently, but in human clinical trials, it doesn't lower inflammation and it doesn't improve body composition, so muscle mass and fat mass. We'll talk about the other effects in the last category. Pycnogenol, not going to lower cholesterol, not going to lower blood sugar, not going to help with Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, which are just studied. It's been studied. Horny goatweed, so another testosterone booster, and it's not gonna increase testosterone either. It might increase. So it's named such horny goatweed because it apparently makes goats horny. But we'll see if it's in the last category. Rhodiola rosea, anti-fatigue effects in physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion. So it's not going to reduce fatigue if you're mentally exhausted or overall exhausted. Vitamin E, reduce wrinkles, so oral vitamin E. Now, the last category, so supplements that need more research. There is some papers that show they might have some benefits. One trial is not going to be enough to say anything conclusive, but it's, warrants further research. So spermidine, popular longevity supplement, it supposedly increases autophagy, which it does so in animal studies, but In human studies, the only kind of reliable effect would be maybe increased cognitive function in elderly people and raising DHEA levels. But these are only very small individual studies, so that we would need more papers for sure to say anything conclusive about spermidine. Senolytics, so fisetin, quercetin, and apigenin, they do decrease senescent cells in humans, in animals as well, but that's pretty much it. They're thought to be useful, or they are considered to be targets for Alzheimer's, cancer, and other age-related diseases, but they might only lower inflammation at the moment. So we'll see how it turns out in the future clinical trials. NMN and NR improve metabolic health, support exercise performance slightly, but we need more evidence. Urolithin A, so this is the popular supplement, and there is a study where they showed urolithin A supplementation increased mitophagy markers, so this mitochondrial autophagy in humans, which has a central role in aging and longevity, but it was based on only 6 individuals, and it was taken from something like 27 or 29 people in total. 29 people got the supplement, but only 6 people were reported to have shown increased mitophagy markers. So I would like to see a bigger sample size, especially if you cut down the sample size to a small amount. If you start from 30 and you end up with only 6 people reporting those markers, then it's kind of sketchy. I would like to see more people actually showing increased mitophagy markers. And the same with increased endurance at VO2 max. The studies where it supposedly increased endurance was based on like 6-minute walking test in elderly people, but that's not a real test of endurance, I would say. And the VO2 max scores as well were not really that significant. Increased muscle strength, so no effect on grip strength, upper body strength. The only thing was increased lower body torque. So I would definitely like to see more studies testing the strength as well. And these studies are done on people who don't exercise. So arguably, if you exercised, you wouldn't see any effects. If you exercised and you took urolithin A, you probably wouldn't see any effects on muscle strength or endurance, because the exercise would just get you the results, and adding the urolithin A wouldn't give you any additional benefits. The same with mitophagy and autophagy. Exercise already increases autophagy and mitophagy. So, if you exercise, you probably don't need to take urolithin A. Alpha-ketoglutarate, so there is some evidence that it helps with wound healing, but no specific skin anti-aging effects. But it has a potential mechanism for that. Increased anaerobic performance, so as I mentioned about the bench press performance. So if you take it before a workout, then it might help with anaerobic performance and improve bone mineral density as well. There's some studies on this, especially postmenopausal women, but it could be that it's the calcium in calcium alpha-ketoglutarate. If you take arginine alpha-ketoglutarate, then maybe the effects aren't there. Boron, so interesting mineral, improves bone mineral density in some studies by improving vitamin D status and lowering inflammation, and also increasing testosterone and estrogen by reducing SHBG, sex hormone binding globulin, which binds to your free testosterone. So arguably, boron is not going to work if your SHBG is already low and if your bone density is already high. I've taken boron, it didn't increase my testosterone or lower my SHBG, or like my SHBG was lower when I wasn't taking boron, because one of the best ways to lower SHBG is to eat more calories, especially eat more carbohydrates. Reduce joint pain, but these things are just to be researched more, and I would say they work only in like particular conditions. So if you have high SHBG, then it's useful to add boron. Carnitine, support weight loss and increase anaerobic performance. So there is some evidence that it might do so, but more evidence is needed. And interestingly, for carnitine, the oral carnitine is not that bioavailable. The injectable carnitine is a lot more effective. So maybe a lot of the other evidence of carnitine could be also dependent of the way you take it. Next, we have creatine. So creatine has some evidence that improves recovery from traumatic brain injury, even if you take it prophylactically. So it doesn't like prevent TBI or treat TBI, but it speeds up some of the recovery. The same with neurodegeneration. It's not been proven to prevent or treat neurodegeneration or Alzheimer's. There is some studies on the Alzheimer's patients that they have slightly better memory, but it's definitely worthwhile to keep researching creatine in this like the brain area. Causing hair loss. So there's a myth pretty much around creatine that it causes hair loss. Now, for some reason, some people swear by it that creatine does cause them hair loss. But in an actual clinical study where they gave people creatine, there was no effect on hair loss. And there was also no effect on DHT, dihydrotestosterone, that is thought to be the causal link for hair loss. So it didn't even raise DHT. So there's no like biological explanation why creatine would have caused hair loss. And the old study that kind of perpetuated the idea that creatine causes hair loss is a pretty old study on some football players, and they didn't even look at hair loss. They only looked at DHT. So, and they presume that it's going to cause hair loss. But the latest clinical trial on this didn't show increased DHT levels. And it also doesn't cause kidney damage if you don't have prior kidney dysfunction. If you have worse kidney function, or if you have very high creatinine levels, just poor kidney function, then it's best to stop taking creatine, but you don't need to stop taking creatine if you're with normal working kidneys. Hyaluronic acid, there are a few clinical trials on reducing skin wrinkles and dryness, but it's definitely a smaller amount of studies than collagen, for example. Melatonin, so an interesting effect of melatonin is that it potentially could help with BPA excretion. So it stimulates the lymphatic system in the brain that in your sleep pretty much detoxifies the brain, flushes out different toxins, including BPA. So having high melatonin in your sleep is important, but the evidence that it's gonna definitely help with microplastic clearance is not there yet, but it's worthwhile to look at it, in my opinion. Lower testosterone, there's no evidence that it really does lower testosterone either. Melatonin levels are high before puberty and they drop low when puberty starts, and after puberty it stays low. So there's the fear that if you take melatonin, then it postpones puberty, which there is some evidence for. So children before puberty, if they take melatonin, they might get puberty a little bit later. But there's no evidence that the melatonin would lower testosterone in adult males. Megadosing 100 milligrams melatonin is also something that I would definitely want to see more research of. There are actually a surprising amount of studies using this insane amounts of melatonin, like 100, 300, 1,000 milligrams of melatonin. But I would like to see more well-controlled studies on that. Macular degeneration, interestingly, melatonin might also protect the eyes and help to prevent macular degeneration. So more research on that would be interesting. Lithium, improve cognition in neurodegeneration, so Alzheimer's and dementia. There is bipolar patients who have taken lithium do appear to have lower risk of dementia, but there's no like well-controlled randomized controlled trial testing that. There are some of these randomized controlled trials looking at the effects of lithium in Alzheimer's patients, whether or not it would reduce the pathology or improve their cognition. So far, they haven't been successful. The most recent meta-analysis on a few of these studies didn't include the studies that use lithium orotate. So they use the different types of lithium. And lithium orotate is thought to be the effective form. So I would like to see that analysis being replicated with lithium orotate. Theanine, so it's not going to have nootropic effects alone. So the theanine works best in conjunction with caffeine, and mostly by just balancing out caffeine. It smooths out caffeine's this stimulatory effect, but it doesn't really have like nootropic effects in of itself. If you are a more like anxious type of person, then theanine can be a good supplement for you. If you're a more mellow person, then theanine probably is not going to do anything, and maybe you want that little bit of small anxiety from caffeine, right? So it depends on the person. Lion's mane, needs more research on improving memory in mild cognitive impairment and to improve cognition overall. There's no definite proof of that. Another kinase, there are some trials on another kinase improving atherosclerotic plaque, but they've used different doses. The low dose studies didn't see an effect. High dose studies did see an effect. So I would like to see a study that uses all these different doses and finds the threshold effect. And more studies to just see. Omega-3s. So contrary to popular belief, omega-3s don't harm the skin. They actually increase the skin's resilience against UV radiation. Randomized controlled trials have given people omega-3 supplements for 3 months, and their skin had lower inflammation and greater protection against UV radiation. So omega-3s, like carotenoids, protect your skin against UV radiation. And there's also studies on certain skin conditions, inflammatory skin conditions, where omega-3 supplements help to treat that. Now, of course, you should use a high quality omega-3, but there's no evidence that the omega-3s cause inflammation. If anything, then they actually lower inflammation. And there's the recent study as well where omega-3 supplementation use was associated with increased cognitive decline in Chinese people. But there's observation studies which definitely doesn't prove anything. And there are other randomized controlled trials that show that omega-3s actually support cognition. So the randomized controlled trials are much higher quality of evidence than this one observation study. So there's no evidence that omega-3s are bad for the brain. They have a lot more evidence to support that they are good for the brain. Rhodiola rosea, lower stress and anxiety, and increase VO2 max. There's not enough evidence, in my opinion, yet. Just a few studies. Pycnogenol, reducing atherosclerotic plaque. So there is some studies that it does lower plaque, but it's not that well controlled, those studies. And that's the same with improved cognition and memory. Shilajit, so a supplement that is also popular nowadays, and people take it for testosterone, but there's no actual very good human controlled trials using Shilajit for increasing testosterone. So it's mostly based on animal studies and subjective anecdotal experience. Vitamin C, preventing common colds, and Tongat Ali, increasing testosterone in non-hypogonadal men. So Tongat Ali does increase testosterone. It's one of the few testosterone boosters that might increase testosterone, but it mostly works in men with low testosterone. All right, that's the end of this list. I know this list had a little bit of selection bias. I mostly talked about the supplements that have evidence, and I talked a little bit less about supplements that don't have evidence. But if I didn't mention any particular supplement, then it's more likely that it doesn't have that evidence, because there are a lot more supplements out there that have less evidence. So I'm not going to talk about the supplements that don't have the evidence. I'm going to talk about the ones that actually have evidence. Check out the new book, The New Science of Supplements, on Amazon. But if you want to see me rank 100 supplements from worst to best, then check out this video next.